It's no secret that the increase in cyber threats and attacks has become a national priority. As state and local governments and other public sector groups develop investment plans to take advantage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, cybersecurity really needs to be top of mind. I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and here to talk about that is Jim Richberg, Public Sector Field CISO and Vice President of Information Security at Fortinet. Jim, thank you for joining us. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
And I always enjoy chatting with you, Wyatt.
So let's set the stage a little. Why has cybersecurity become such an important part of this larger conversation around the nation's infrastructure?
Well, Wyatt, I think the first thing to realize is all of these infrastructures, even things that are brick and mortar, have got digital dimensions, whether they're going to be sensors, whether they're going to be actuators that can control things. Even bridges have now got digital sensors on them. Infrastructure indoors. I looked it up recently. The oldest infrastructure I could find record of in this country is there's a bridge that people are still driving over, commuters, that was built in 1697. So not saying anything we build is going to last 350 years, but my point is you build this infrastructure and it's around for a long time. It's expensive, it's hard to change. So you need to address future-proofing it, make it as upgradable as possible going forward, and take cognizance of the threats that already exist and basically build security into all of these because they're all digital. They're all potentially exploitable by cyber means. So you want to factor that in right up front.
Well, and from your perspective, what is the threat landscape around infrastructure today?
Well, Wyatt, we see things ranging from destructive software to ransomware, things that can come in and hold the assets of an infrastructure provider at risk. They can be targets for states, for non-state actors, and we can see activity jump from one sector to another sector. In some cases, by accident, because they're all using the same programmable logic chips, the same industrial control system components. In other cases, it may be by design. But this is something where we already see the bad guys exploiting multiple infrastructures at once.
And then what do you see as the role of cyber threat intelligence and the sharing of threat information across infrastructures and between the public and private sectors and how that's evolving?
Well, Wyatt, I think we have to build that kind of interoperability into the way we architect this refresh of the infrastructure. If you know that the bad guys can move from infrastructure A to infrastructure B, if you can't see them do that, and this is something that would have been addressable at the front end of your upgrade, then shame on us for failing to say, hey, we need to be able to watch the bad guys move. Essentially, it's the equivalent of saying, can the police see you go from jurisdiction A to jurisdiction B? If not, then you have a problem. We'd say that's unacceptable public safety. I think we'd say the same thing from a cyber perspective as well. You talked about public and private sector. A lot of these infrastructures actually blur the line. In many cases, they are funded by public money. They're regulated agencies in many, many cases. Some of them are private, but regulated as well. And let's not forget, the public sector itself is actually an official critical infrastructure. So we really are all in this together. And that means that the public and private sector genuinely need to be able to exchange information about threats they're seeing, and that we need to be able to see threats in multiple infrastructures.
I think you'd agree that this has been in place for many years. Can you shed some light on why implementing cybersecurity measures across the nation in our infrastructure remains so complex and challenging?
Well, part of this is, let's look at where a lot of the money is coming from, especially with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act money. It comes from specific federal agencies, each of which have their mission, and they're good at doing that mission. So there are a dozen-ish agencies, each putting out money to a different kind of sector. It goes to state or local government that in turn puts it in a specific agency, or in some cases gives it to the private sector. Everybody is running in their lane. Everybody's working in their stovepipe. It's nobody who's stepping back to say, hey, wait a minute, we need to ensure some degree of interoperability. I like to use the metaphor that this is like the digital equivalent of the field of dreams. If you connect to these infrastructures, there's probably some good that could come out of that. Can I tell you off the top of my head how having a bridge and wastewater talk to each other will be used? No. But on the other hand, when President Eisenhower funded the interstate highway system in 1956, no one, as far as I know, could have foreseen how that was going to fundamentally transform America from the way our geography evolved to the way our society and economy work. So if you build it, they will use it. But as I said, at a minimum, we know the bad guys are doing it. But you've got this plethora of jurisdictions, of separate functional things, and that means it's challenging. And the final point I'd note on that is you have a disparity of capability. You have massive infrastructure providers that have got significant cyber capabilities, and then you've got tiny ones that don't even have IT staff, much less a cybersecurity professional. So it's clearly not a one-size-fits-all situation that we're dealing with here.
Well, and then lastly, I know, Jim, you've been a big proponent of discussing the need for standards and guidance to drive the funds at the local level. Can you just expand on how that might unfold now that we have this Investment Act?
Well, I do think when the money comes out in these different stovepipes, everyone's staying in their lane at some point, whether it's state government, whether it's local government, someone needs to say, we need to build some degree of interoperability in. Would it be wonderful to build Jim's field of dreams where the infrastructures can work with each other? Yeah, but we don't have to do that. But at a minimum, we need to build that ability to have interoperability and visibility of threats into it. And we've been in this situation before. There was a time when first responders each did what they thought made sense in terms of internal communications, radios, et cetera. And then we discovered when we had a big disaster or a fire that involved needing to marshal resources from multiple jurisdictions, you literally could have first responders who couldn't talk to each other because left to their own devices, everyone had picked a different radio frequency. And we finally said, okay, you need to build this interoperability into it. And as you do that, Wyatt, there are a couple of things to think of. Don't pick hard and fast standards. Don't say if it's an encryption issue, I want 512-bit encryption, because that may sound really good now. 10 years from now, that's going to look really quaint. We're getting close to quantum cryptography. So pick an area and then make it be associated with something like National Institute of Standards and Technology or ISO standards that can themselves be upgraded. So try to future-proof it in there. And when you build this infrastructure, if you have the choice between making something physical and making something cyber, go the software route. Go with a software-defined network, go with a cloud-based solution, because it's going to be a whole lot easier to update something that's built around software than it is to be able to say, I'm going to rip and replace something that, I may not have the money, and where it's just simply going to be harder and more expensive to do. So there are smart things we can do building on this idea of standards that can help us future-proof the investments that we're making in infrastructure right now.
Well, those are some great points and some great recommendations as well. Jim Richberg, thank you so much for sharing your insights as always, and your recommendations with us today, and around the idea of better protecting the nation's infrastructure from cyber threats.
Thanks, Wyatt. It's been a pleasure talking with you.